So week 8 for graphics. I'll just show you the final project, project 4, because that just has them all mixed together. So here's my 4. That's color, texture, texture light, and then color light. They interact with the colors you'd expect. These obviously don't have any light parameters, so they're just bright as hell. And then light, light interacts with, as you'd expect. And they're all being meshed out, so you can see the color differences between these and then the texture differences between the two of these. And in the code, obviously, they're all textured out into graphic objects, graphic object, and such. And then the information for that graphic object is sent to the, depending on what the graphic object is. And when it gets down to the render, I have a convoluted way to render them. It's just macros to turn on and off who I want to spawn. And it's just, you send in the information, so you send the light parameters or the view matrices, and you render it. And then the render is done as you'd expect. It gets through the mesh count, and then it sends that information to the shader, sets the context, and then renders that specific mesh, and then all that information is stored up in here. Same with colors, just a lot simpler. I mesh the colors and whatever else. And then obviously there's individual vectors or colors and meshes and such associated with it. And then you had your further work, which was you wanted to separate the meshes into, if you wanted to have specific meshes, to have specific things. So my first idea came to mind was just have a container to hold all of them. So you would have in this single graphics object, you would say, I want to set the texture, I want to set the light, I want to set the texture light. You would pass in that information, the colors associated with, and the mesh. That seemed kind of dumb after a while because it was just much more complicated than it needed to be. So my second idea was to just class it out. So I have a base class, which is render stuff, and then everything inherits from render stuff. And then in the constructor of a render stuff, you pass in what's like the child will require, like the specific shader and that information associated with it. So the color will obviously want the color, the mesh number, and the shader. And then the color light will obviously want the light information. So the 3 vectors for ambient and such. You can read this more if you want. And the texture and such. And then in the render function, you would go through the container that's holding all your render stuff. So whether that's like 2 or like 16. And you would then take that information, call the render stuff function on the render stuff class. That will handle setting to context, sending the information to the shader that's necessary. So like the light and color matrices and or not parameters, and then you would render that mesh associated with while looping through. And this came off definitely as the best option as opposed to my first one. I'm sure there's a better idea, but my quick idea, and well, this took me like 5 or 10 minutes, and then it's much more scalable and it's much easier to organize, I think. So that is week 8.